Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're stepping back in time to a really specific, deeply emotional moment in history. The time is August 1944. The place? San Diego, California. Now, obviously, the whole world is at war, but for the Caesar family, this massive global conflict is about to become incredibly intimate and honestly, painfully local. We're going to explore the historical and emotional weight of a family facing a looming, inevitable countdown to war. It's a story of quiet dread, everyday resilience, and the incredibly heavy burden of just saying goodbye. Picture this. 17-year-old Marcia Chamberlain is standing on the docks watching a loved one sail away, and she comes to this poignant realization. It doesn't feel like a Navy movie at all. It just feels like he's gone. I mean, wow, that just perfectly captures what we're unpacking today, doesn't it? It really emphasizes the stark difference between Hollywood's loud, dramatic version of war and the quiet, crushing reality that families on the home front were actually experiencing. There was no sweeping, cinematic soundtrack here, just the hum of a ship's engine and the heavy silence of a worried family.
Section 1. A Gray Morning Departure.
Okay, let's dive right into this first chapter. Before dawn on Wednesday, August 16th, at the 32nd Street Naval Base, a strict, unforgiving countdown officially began for Fred Seaver and his wife, Betty. The sky over the bay was still way more gray than blue, and coffee was just going cold in thermos cups. And what's crucial to understand here is the ticking clock. Every single day tightened the emotional bottleneck for them. We start on the 16th with Fred's brother, Ed, sailing out. Then a farewell party on the 20th, moving their belongings on the 24th, and finally the ultimate deadline, Fred's own enlistment on the 26th. It's literally a cascading series of goodbyes.
And that brings us to that very first goodbye on August 16th. 158. That is the length and feet of Ed's ship, the LCIG 728. Just 158 feet of low, gray hull sitting against the green water of the bay. On board were 70 sailors, and that included the ship's captain, Lieutenant Edward R. Seaver. By 8 o'clock sharp, the lines came off the pilings, and that hull began its really slow passage out past Point Loma, heading toward the western Pacific. And, well, whatever waited for them out there.
But right before those lines were cast off, the two brothers, Fred and Ed, shared one final dockside exchange. Fred called up to the ship, telling Ed to keep his head down. And Ed, with this incredibly sobering look behind his usual familiar grin, shot back, "Look who's talking. You'll be in blues yourself in 10 days. Talk about a stark reminder, right? Fred is standing there watching his brother leave for war, knowing full well his own departure is barely a week away.
Section 2. Boxing Up a Life. So the week that followed Ed's departure, it left absolutely zero room for grieving. Every single evening after Fred finished his final days working over at Roar, he and Betty literally had to categorize their entire married life into 3 distinct piles. First up, storage. Things like their wedding gifts and baby clothes that would just have to sit and wait in the Carringers' second garage. Second, keep close. Items Betty and their baby Randy would actually need in Betty's old bedroom on Fern Street. You know, the radio, her art supplies. And third, discard. Stuff that was given to neighbors or just hauled straight to the trash bin. It was this incredibly slow, painful work. They were dismantling a life they had built together, knowing their house was only theirs for a season. But, among all that endless sorting, there was one specific box that really stood out. A stack of Fred's engineering texts from his job at Roar was placed in a box, and he marked it in his own handwriting with just a single word, keep. It wasn't really a practical gesture, it was a hopeful one. It was this silent promise to himself and to Betty that there was a future after the war. That his drafting table would be right there waiting for him when he finally returned.
Section 3. A Solemn Sunday Gathering. Fast forward a bit to Sunday, August 20th. The community gathers for a going-away party that nobody truly wants to call a party, and it highlighted this heartbreaking duality on the home front. On one hand, you've got the adults carrying this immense, heavy reality. They're quiet with worry, staring down that 6-day deadline before Fred leaves. But on the other hand, you have the completely oblivious joy of the kids. 4 young boys, Randy, Peter, Clark, and Richard, were just busy turning the backyard garden into a joyful battlefield of their own making. Running around the tomato stakes and the fish ponds, totally insulated from the dread all the adults were feeling. Right in the middle of a dinner of roast chicken and boiled potatoes, Marshall Chamberlain actually stood up to deliver a toast. He said, "I'll just say this family and this town are proud of both those boys, and we mean to hold up our end while they're gone."
He promised that everyone would write letters the exact moment either Ed or Fred had an address. And that toast, it just perfectly captures the profound community support of that era. It was a solemn vow from the whole neighborhood to protect and support the families who were left behind. Now, amidst all this heavy, heavy emotion, there was actually a sudden, vital break in the tension. Get this, it turned out the gathering was a double occasion. The day before, the 19th, had been Emily Carriger's 45th birthday. So the solemnity was suddenly broken by laughter and the presentation of George's famous lemon cake. Betty even gave Emily this beautiful 1929 watercolor painting as a gift. It was just a brief, lovely moment of ordinary happiness. The war and that looming 6-day countdown were set aside just long enough for a birthday, a slice of cake, and the warmth of people who truly loved each other. Section 4. The Quiet Drive Home. Okay, so once the party ends and they're back in the car, the reality just comes crashing back in. Betty was almost too tired to even cry anymore. She was just totally exhausted from a day of smiling way harder than she wanted to, holding sleeping baby Randy in her arms. Fred is driving, one hand on the wheel, the other resting right on Betty's knee. And in that dark, familiar drive back to Chula Vista, he made this really quiet admission. He told her he was glad they had the party, but some part of him just wished he could skip straight past all these painful goodbyes. He wanted to fast forward to the other side of it, to the day he would come walking back up to the Fern Street house after the war was over. Betty didn't answer with words. She just put her hand over his in this silent, mutual dread and gratitude as they drove toward a house that was half-packed, feeling a little less like home with every passing minute.
So, what does this all leave us with? How do we actually carry the weight of saying goodbye when the future is entirely unknown? The Seaver family's countdown in August 1944 is this incredibly powerful reminder of the immense, quiet, emotional toll paid in half-packed houses and forced smiles. It wasn't some loud, dramatic Hollywood movie. It was just the heavy, crushing reality of ordinary people facing a totally uncertain fate. I want you to take that thought with you today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time.